and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova. Normally on Heroic Media, we will explore news headlines that deal with very foundational moral issues relating to family, marriage, and life. But on this episode, we are going to have a special segment, and we're going to basically just answer a bunch of viewer questions that we've had on our past shows.
Perfect. So our first comments come from Kathy and Kent. They're both objecting to an earlier segment in which we had said that it would be okay for a Catholic to vote for a Democrat or to be Democrat as long as they're in alignment with the church on basic moral issues.
Right.
And saying that basically being Catholic doesn't mean being Republican. And so Kathy and Kent both objected to this. Kathy said, as Catholics, we are supposed to vote to limit evil. A vote for the Democratic Party is a vote to advance the agenda of the culture of death.
Yeah, so some pretty strong words, I guess. And so I guess we just need to dive a little bit deeper into kind of that whole discussion. And one of the things that I could relate to right off the bat was with Kathy, and she was expressing her deep regret for voting for a particular candidate, and then basically in the 11th hour when she was counting on them the most to stand up for pro-life, and that was one of the big reasons why she voted for them, you know, they flopped.
They flopped, right.
And I can say, like, out of experience that that's definitely, you're just like, man, you feel let down. You're like, I really, you know, being pro-life was one of the top reasons I voted for you. And then you failed me. So I can totally relate to that. And I can also say that that doesn't always happen with just Democrats, right? That happens with Republicans as well. And so you may have voted for a Republican candidate. Maybe that Republican candidate, you're a Democrat, but that Republican candidate was your best option or whatever, right? And yeah, we've seen Republicans fail in that 11th hour.
Right, absolutely. Reagan was the first president to, you know, legalize no-fault divorce. George W. Bush was the first president to federally fund embryonic stem cell research. So, you know, you know, one thing that Kathy said is that a vote for the Democratic Party is a vote for the culture of death. We don't vote for parties, we vote for people.
Exactly.
I think that's a really important distinction,
right?
Because you have to look at the individual.
Yes.
And so, you know, the other thing that I think is important here is when you say this is what the Democratic Party stands for abortion, they support abortion, what does that mean? The Democratic Party has a platform. Both parties have a platform.
Yes.
And that lays out their basic beliefs. But it's very long, and not everyone in the party agrees with everything.
Yes.
So it's not like the Democratic Party, their platform just says, we love abortion. Actually, if you look through their platform, it's over 240 paragraphs.
Wow.
There's about 10 paragraphs that Catholics would find morally objectionable. But suppose that you agree with all of the other paragraphs in there, you know, national security, taxes, education, energy and environment, social security, Medicare, infrastructure, manufacturing, workplace laws, global development, public health, firearms, disability legislation, agriculture. There's a lot of material there.
Yes.
So if you agree with the Democratic Party on a lot of those things, then you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
But if you also very firmly value life and value church teaching, then you're a pro-life Democrat and you're a Catholic Democrat, and that's okay. You can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. And I think the whole end goal, we have to remember what the end goal is. And the end goal, what we want is, we don't want to tie pro-life to a particular party.
We don't want to limit it to one party.
We don't want to limit to one party, and we also don't want to like do what you just said and put this umbrella statement, right? Say Democrats are automatically this, right? Because it immediately shuts down the conversation. And I guess the question is if you say, hey, I'm a Democrat, somebody says I'm a Democrat to you, and you go, oh, well, then you're not pro-life, you automatically shut them down. What does that do for the end goal of us trying to convert the hearts and minds of other people and say, hey, you know, Democrats, yes, you can be pro-life, and here's, you know, we need it to start with one person. So, you know, and then move from there to 2 to 3, and then, you know, and then start to change their platform, right?
Exactly.
So if we shut that down immediately, it basically slams the door shut and says, nope. And the thing about it is, too, each party has different views. Like you just said, there's all kinds of different things. And those are all important issues as well, right? I mean, I've heard it before from Democrats that are excellent Catholics that have said, you know, why am I going to vote for that Republican? You know, Republicans will get in office and they don't enact pro-life laws anyway. You know, and just like the whole 11th hour comment from earlier, you know, you expect them to do something and then they don't. You know, so that can go on both sides, and it can, you know, it's really tricky. Basically, I think you have to do the best that you can with what you believe people are going to do and say, right?
Absolutely.
And that does not have to be something that's divided on party lines.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one other example that I just want to give for our viewers, we'll call this a tale of two politicians. So here's two politicians. They're both currently serving in federal office. They're both from Illinois.
Okay.
The first one is Mark Kirk. He's a Republican. He's been in office for nearly 15 years. He was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2000, served 5 terms, was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010. He's still there. He is a Republican, right? So this is the party that their platform endorses life.
Yeah.
He is a very strong supporter of abortion. NARAL, which is the National Abortion Rights Advocacy League, NARAL Pro-Choice, gave him a 100% pro-choice ranking, which means that every time he was given a bill dealing with abortion, he supported abortion. So he has supported embryonic stem cell research. He has voted against a bill that would make it a crime to kill a fetus if you harm in an attack on a pregnant woman. He has just recently on this vote to try to defund Planned Parenthood, he opposed it. He became the second sitting Republican senator to support same-sex marriage. So if he's part of the party that supports life, allegedly, does that make him a good?
Right.
You know, he's not pro-life.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you can't just say, oh, well, he's part of the party of life. You can't give him a pass on that.
Right.
In contrast, I want to say Dan Lipinski, he's a Democrat from Illinois. Now, he's a Catholic, and he says that his faith very much influences his beliefs. He's been in the House of Representatives for 10 years. He has been given by NARAL pro-choice a 0% ranking, which means every time legislation comes before him, he votes pro-life, all of those things. And he not only votes for them, but he has sponsored many pro-life bills. So if you look at this guy, he's taken a lot of criticism from the members of his party.
Yes.
But he says, guys, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
I am a Democrat, but I am pro-life. So, you know, just I would say in response to the comments of a couple of our viewers, which one of those would you vote for? They're both in Illinois, they're in different districts, but if you had to vote for one of those two people, who would you vote for? The pro-life Democrat or the pro-choice, the pro-abortion Republican?
And look at it both ways, if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, right? If I'm a Republican and I have to pick between those two, who would I vote for? And if I'm a Democrat, who would I vote for? And I think that kind of gets onto the next, I guess, bullet item that I would have, and that is that yes, we are in the world, but we're not supposed to be of the world. You know, like the Catholic Church is an organism that is far beyond any political system, right? And so I think we have to remember that as well. And it's kind of like, you know, one of the viewers, I think it was Kent, he said that, you know, we're not really, a true Catholic isn't in either party. And I think he may have said that just because usually, you know, the general consensus of the party or whatever, the view of that party usually, I don't know if it ever has lined up perfectly with Catholic teaching, and I highly doubt that it has. But we have to remember that, you know, for me, when I think about voting about a candidate, I look at what the issues are and what the most important issues are, right? Because, you know, one day when I die, you know, if God asks me, like, hey, you know, remember back in 2016 when you were voting for the president? Well, you know, you voted for this one because you wanted to, you know, maybe have a better chance at getting a job increase. But this guy supported abortion and, you know, made things a lot worse, you know, and you valued your pay more than, you know, your, which is of course a very important topic, right? So we have to weigh all these. It's a very complex, nebulous thing, but I think we have to remember what is most important also. Right,
absolutely. And looking at this, what is, I wouldn't be surprised. There was actually a push in 2012. I was at both the Democratic and Republican conventions where they sort of give the rubber stamp to their platform. And there was a push at that time for the Republicans to drop their defense of marriage plank from their platform and just go neutral on marriage. We're not for gay marriage, we're not against it, we're just not going to take a stance on it. And I'm sure that was defeated. I'm sure that push will come up again in 2016, and we'll see if the party stands on that or not.
Right.
But there is a group called the Log Cabin Republicans, which is a group of Republicans who do support same-sex marriage. They have 34 chapters across the country.
There you go.
So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, there's a need to stand up for Catholic teaching, because the way that the parties change their views is simply from the people within them changing their views. And so the only way that happens in both parties is if we stand up for what we believe.
Exactly, and I think you just answered Kent's question where he said, you know, please show me where the GOP is preaching error. And so you already laid it out earlier, I think with some examples, and then you also laid out an example there. And I mean, I have a couple of examples recently, like, you know, Trump, he's trying to run for president, right? And he recently flip-flop on, you know, Planned Parenthood and his support for that. And same thing I heard about, like, Dr. Ben Carson, and he was like, oh yeah, you know, it's okay to take that a morning after pill. And, you know, I've heard, you know, these are just examples of Republicans, you know, speaking out or being associated or voting in one way or the other that is not within Catholic teaching. So I think it's erroneous to say that the GOP platform is completely right and the Democrats are completely wrong.
Right,
No,
it's much more
I mean, I think you can make some generalizations. Like, yes, we do probably today have a better chance of a Republican passing a pro-life law than a Democrat, but the whole point is that we need to change that. And we need to have equal opportunity for pro-life measures within each.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll respond to more of your comments and questions after the break. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova. So for this next section, it's going to be all about healthcare. And so let's jump right in with a comment from Dee. She says the following: there are so many vaccines that doctors try to push on us. Do you know which ones use aborted babies? Which credible resource did you use to get this information? So I think this is a good question, because this is a topic we've talked about, of course, and it's pertinent, right? We don't want to, as Catholics, we should not want to participate in, moral evil.
Right, and that's an important point. So just to give a little bit of viewer background here, the way that a lot of people have some confusion about how this works. What happened is about 40 years ago, they took some cells from 2 aborted babies. And they used those to start cell lines, which basically multiply and create lots more cells. And so some of those other cells were used to grow the virus for the vaccine. So there's not actual cells from the aborted baby in the vaccine, but there's still moral concerns and debate over this. And in the National Catholic Bioethics Center says, if doing so is practical, you should ask your physician to use an alternative vaccine, but there is no moral obligation to use products that are less effective or inaccessible. And so one of the lists that I looked at, and it included chickenpox, rabies, hepatitis, rubella, shingles, DTaP, but not all of those. So you could get alternatives for some of them, but not all. That's where it gets kind of tricky.
It does, especially where you are in the world as well, because I know there's some vaccines, like for chickenpox, right now there's not an alternative. So you have to use the unethical version or whatever potentially unethical version.
Right, and so as far as official church teaching, the church hasn't issued an official teaching on this, but the Pontifical Academy for Life has said that if there's no alternative and if there's a serious health risk posed by not vaccinating, then it's okay to do this. And the reason that they said their explanation is that it's passive material cooperation, so it's not directly involving the abortion, it's not endorsing the abortion, it's a very distant connection. And because there is considerable health dangers. And they did add the caveat that we have the obligation to speak up and to try to act out against this and to say, hey, we want alternatives to be made to try to sort of change what's going on in the medical community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I was going to cite that source as well as a credible source, right? Like you said, and it gets into detail about it, right? The time, how the time from when it happened, your knowledge of it, if you were directly a part of that initial act or not, right? So there's all kinds of how you are complying with this evil or not. And so it's not just like this easy, like yes or no kind of answer, and probably because, like you said, they haven't made this official announcement or whatever, but there's plenty of information that will give you a great direction on where to head. And there's plenty of alternatives. You've already mentioned them, right? You said you can ask for the alternatives. You can, and as far as credible sources, as our viewer D was asking for, ask your doctor, right? Ask him what the name of the vaccine is, then check your sources and look for the source of the vaccine. And so there's lots of different things that we can do to try to overcome these things, get around them, be knowledgeable about them. And I mean, that's what I would recommend to do.
Yeah, well, the example that I've heard is that suppose that you're at the hospital and you need a blood transfusion, but you have a rare blood type, and so it's really hard to find. Well, suppose that there's somebody, in another room in that hospital who was murdered, and that person matches your blood type. Is it wrong if you're accepting blood from that murdered person? Are you condoning their murder? Their murder happened, and that was wrong. But that it's not ideal, and you don't. If you want to go for another option, if you have one, but if you don't, that's sort of the example that's given.
That's not a bad example. I think that's probably as close as you can get to it. It's hard to kind of decide on those things. But the good news is that for the most part, you can get around these things. But as a parent, you have a duty also to make sure that your children are protected, right? And so you might want to get them vaccinated, but the nice thing is that we have, obviously we have the choice, and you need to let your conscience dictate how you're going to have that. And you need to have a well-formed conscience too.
Right.
So
very important.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one.
Sure. And our next story, this comes from Kathleen. She was talking about a segment that we did on eSure. So just to give a little background on eSure, this is marketed as a type of permanent birth control where they insert metal coils into a woman's fallopian tubes. The tissue grows around that, prevents the egg from being released, and so it renders you infertile.
Right.
Now, this has been associated with side effects including perforated organs, metal coils getting lodged in the colon, fetal disfigurement due to nickel poisoning, chronic pain, exhaustion, bouts of depression, suicidal thoughts.
Man.
Really awful stuff.
Yeah.
But the FDA has done this process where they said, okay, you can't sue the manufacturer. We're giving it this special type of approval where you can't sue the manufacturer if anything wrong happens with this. And a lot of people are crying foul on that, and they're saying, wait a second, this is not good for women's health.
Yep.
So what Kathleen has to say, I should think that if a doctor received substantial incentives from a pharmaceutical company to implement the insertion of the device you describe, and if the woman later experienced serious complications, the pharmaceutical company and the doctor should be liable for malpractice, FDA notwithstanding. Let's see someone sue and see what happens to set a precedent.
Yeah, I mean, my first response to that is kind of like, yeah, do it, you know what I mean? But then on the other hand, you already mentioned some kind of sort of the legal protections that are already set up through the FDA. So as much as I think we'd like to, you know, we live in such a litigious society that people, you know, they protect themselves, companies and organizations, and it is quite corrupt if you ask me, because just like you pointed out and like we talk about on the show all the time, these products are not in the best interest of women, you know, in multiple ways.
Right.
And so it's really just kind of shows how corrupt these organizations, it's really about making money. And it's just crazy to me how also just bent we are on, you know, society in general is on trying to treat fertility as like some sort of horrible thing that needs to be stamped out. It's just awful all around.
Right. Yeah. This is a really awful product. So many women have taken this unknowingly without realizing some of these consequences. There's actually more than nearly 20,000 women who have joined a Facebook group saying that they were harmed by this device. And they asked for a meeting with the FDA, and the FDA said, finally, after a long time, said, okay, we'll grant you a meeting, but it's right during Pope Francis's visit to the US. So now they're saying, well, it's gonna be buried, it's not gonna get any media attention, nobody's gonna know that this happened. So they're actually now planning a hunger strike in front of the FDA to try to draw attention to what happened to them and to say, you know, we need to draw attention to this.
Yeah.
I know there are a couple of lawsuits underway, but some of the details are sort of obscure because they're still in the works.
Yep.
But it'll be interesting to see, even if it doesn't win in the court of law, we'll see if it wins in the court of public opinion.
Yes.
If enough people are speaking out against this, that the FDA pulls it or adds a lot more restrictions to it.
Absolutely, which can even be more powerful than having some sort of law conviction. Yep, absolutely. All right, stay tuned. We have one more segment coming up after the break. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. For our final segment, we're going to read Gary's comments. He has the following to say. The present anti-death penalty sentiments of those within the church, while outwardly may seem commendable, may be the result of lack of abhorrence of sin and the evil it has brought into the world. I sometimes get very suspicious of the anti-death penalty faction within the church because many of them seem to have very liberal views when it comes to Catholic dogma and discipline. Being pro-death penalty does not make one a bad Catholic because anti-death penalty is not a dogma of the church. So a lot to cover in there, right? But it's all about the death penalty, right?
It's very interesting. First of all, I would say that just to say that you don't have to follow this because it's not dogma of the church. Dogma is one way that the church proclaims truth in its teaching, but it's not the only way. And generally, moral teachings are not proclaimed as dogma.
Yes.
So there's no church dogma that says you can't rape people and kidnap people. You know, moral teaching is generally not proclaimed as dogma. That doesn't mean that the church is okay with those things.
Yes.
So first of all, that's an important distinction.
I think
we can't
that's a
say
key
you only have to.
distinction.
One of the places that we look for broader church teaching is the Catechism, and the Catechism does have something to say about the death penalty.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that is one of the big key things because so many times you hear the word dogma thrown around, and it's not like there's this list that's like, hey, this is the dogma list of Catholics, and then it's got a list of stuff. And I also think it's important to get away from the whole list mentality, right? Where it's like the Catholic Church is just a list of things that you shouldn't do, right? Or you can't do. People say, I would say can't do. The church just says, these are the things you can't do, right? But really, the church is there to help guide us to heaven, right? And they want to give us everything that we can, that they can, to get us there. And one of those things, of course, is all of the teachings on things that we should or should not do stem from our love for God, right? So I think we have to remember that to start with, and that includes the death penalty. And you're right, the Catechism of the Catholic Church is a great place to go. It's not dogma per se, but it is official teaching of the Catholic Church. That's what the Catechism of the Catholic Church is the official teaching of the Catholic Church.
Right.
And so I think you've got a quote here from what it says.
Right, yeah, and so I broke this up into a couple of parts. So technically Gary is right in saying that, no, this doesn't have the same weight as abortion. This is an area for disagreement, but it explains how you can disagree in the Catechism. It says, the traditional teaching of the Church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. And then it goes on to say, if, however, non-lethal means are sufficient to defend and protect people's safety from the aggressor, then we should do that. And then it concludes by saying that the cases in which the execution of the offender is an absolute necessity are very rare, if not practically non-existent, because we have the ability to protect society without killing people.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's up to, there's some prudential judgment in saying, in a certain instance, do we need this to protect society? In general, the Church says, yeah, the death penalty is okay if that's the only way. But the recent popes have really been calling us to re-examine whether or not we really need it.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key. And it kind of ties into what he said, too, about being a good Catholic. And one of the things is like I try to stay away from like calling somebody a good Catholic or not a good Catholic. And the main reason that I do that is because people are always in a different spot in their life, and you don't know what they've been exposed to necessarily. What you can say about them is that they may not be in line with church teaching, right? So I try to get away from saying like, hey, you're a good Catholic, you're a bad Catholic, or whatever. But just you're a Catholic that's in line with what the Church teaches on this particular subject or not, right? Some people are working through their salvation and they're trying to figure out like, hey, how can I understand what the Church teaches about the use of contraception? You know what I mean? But they're a saint on all these other things, right? So I think we have to be careful when labeling people because it can also turn people away from the Church. So I always try to be careful about that and say, well, that's maybe not necessarily what the Catholic Church teaches. And I would have say the same thing about this, right? You know, in our society today, in USA, in the United States of America, we have, as you laid out with what the Catechism teaches, we have the ability to stop people without killing them, right? They're called prisons, right? And we have law enforcement officers that can go in there and FBI agents and all the whole 9 yards that can go in there, stop people from doing what they're doing, and lock them away so they can't harm anybody, right? And so we have the ability to do that without killing people.
Right, yeah.
And so that's really what it comes down to. Is
right.
We do have the ability to stop people from doing what they're doing and protect
right.
society, and we have a right to do that. Mm-hmm. And so if you are like, I do agree with him though. I mean, I do think some people kind of hide behind these different things, and that's their justification as opposed to other things. But I think as Catholics, if we want to follow what the Church teaches, we have to follow what the Catechism says about
right.
this.
And I would just add that the person who expanded the Catechism asking us to question this was Saint John Paul II. So
there you go. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org where you can check out stories like the ones we discuss on this episode.
That's it for this time. Until next week, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.